Welcome to Animal Punditry, the international relations podcast with a trough of takes on topics you might care about. I'm Eric.
I'm James.
So there's, of course, been a lot of news about Ukraine for obvious reasons. And while everyone's talking about that, we'd like to take a step back, talk about other things that are happening in the world, and have a more high-level 30,000-foot chat about America's role in the world and power and how it could exercise it, because that is manifesting in Ukraine and the Ukrainian conflict, but also writ large in many other things in the world. So we are going to start by chatting a little bit about our friends, not our foes, Saudi Arabia. I guess it depends who you ask, but that's been a very contentious relationship for years, especially since 9/11. But there have been some interesting updates in terms of how they have been navigating rising powers and their economic relationships with them and the rest of the world into this multipolar moment that we're in.
Yeah, so not everything happens in a vacuum, obviously. So this story is related to Ukraine, even though I know we weren't going to talk about it that much. But so if you've been seeing the oil prices surge, obviously the Biden administration wants to do something about that. So they've been trying to get in contact with Saudi Arabia, or at least the rumor mill goes that they haven't been able. Saudi Arabia hasn't been picking up the phone. I don't know if Joe Biden's administration has tried the Star 69 approach.
They don't even have landlines.
But Saudi Arabia apparently has caller ID. They're not picking up. Poor guy.
Poor guy.
But, hopefully it wasn't too late at night.
Hopefully not.
Hey babe, you want to come over? You got some of that oil with you?
Maybe it's like one of those 1-900 numbers. You should try that. Be like, oh, I'm from the like sexy phone service. Will you pick up? Will you inject some supply into global markets, please?
And just for like a bit of context, if you all remember, after World War II, the U.S. developed like a pretty solid foundational relationship with Saudi Arabia. There was a lot of U.S. infrastructure, like an FDI put into Saudi Arabia, and it's kind of been like a solid, but not exactly like a amazing relationship. There are definitely differences between governance styles between the two countries. I would say, and one of the clashes between kind of values of leadership, I guess, of these countries happened during the Trump administration, when there was pretty much a Saudi ordered murder of one of their journalists, Jamal Khashoggi. In response to this, and I guess just his feeling about Saudi Arabia in general, Joe Biden, when he was still a candidate, pretty much called Saudi Arabia a pariah state. Not the best, I guess, jumping off point for that relationship. But I don't see you haven't really seen like too much of a flare up. It's not anything that can't be unrecovered, but I think that right now with Saudi Arabia kind of not being super compliant with US, like in oils, they're making it a little bit tougher than it probably would have been if the US had turned a blind eye. I'm not saying they should have, but I'm saying that's just kind of the facts on the ground. Another thing that has kind of been happening is that Saudi Arabia has been building a relationship with China, and they've been talking about it, which is different than doing it. Again, like kind of testing the waters and testing the relationship with the US. They've been talking about trading oil to the Chinese and using yuan. This is much different than their regular rules of dealing oil only in US dollars. So this would remove power from the US in terms of being able to control its currency and exert financial power. over different countries and transactions like this. And so it just came out today. This is Monday, March 21st, by the way, at
Thank you for
the
catching that.
early evening, about 6 o'clock or so. But today, the U.S. had announced that it will send Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been asking for these Patriot anti-aircraft missiles to help in their fight in the civil war in Yemen. They've already had them before, but they were just running low. The U.S. Went ahead and got other countries to transfer their Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia, and then the U.S. will just go ahead and refill those other countries' supplies. So maybe this is a little bit of a I scratch your back, you scratch my back. You know, all right, we both said some things. You know, we both said some things. All right, it's fine. Like, we can get past this. You know, maybe it's the international equivalent of like you and a friend going to playing like one-on-one on a basketball court, and the fouls just keep escalating just a little bit, but no one's really calling it out. Everyone's being passive aggressive until you know, one time they're going to foul you just a little hard, and then you're going to lose your shit. But hopefully at the end of the day, you just, you know, you pack up, you shake hands, and you walk off the court. Okay. And you never play with them again.
Yeah, it's been an interesting dance that is the American-Saudi relationship for its entirety of its existence. There's always been a push and pull depending on the geopolitical dynamics of whatever is going on, which has been a lot. We've had a long relationship, as you highlighted, with Saudi Arabia, regional hegemon, very strategically important in terms of oil. Obviously, it's people can talk about Saudi Arabia, but also as an access to the region and imposing power in the region. So another thing that's interesting that you mentioned about the Saudi Arabia relationship or talks with China is that it's just that, talks, not action. Those are two very different things. But there's that push and pull with the US-Saudi relationship. And it's interesting because like the Saudi governance model is something that works nicer with China's outreach, because they don't care about what your governance structure is. Like, if you've got a good deal for China, like, they're in, like, whatever.
You kill a journalist with China, they're like bonus points, my man.
They're like, just one. What are you doing?
They're just worried about their high score. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They know that but they appreciate that you're playing the same game. And so it's really interesting that like it's kind of always been this way, that you have the ideals of liberalism and democracy that we espouse, and but that doesn't exactly square with our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And so that's just something that's kind of always been interesting. And there have been some human rights progression in Saudi Arabia, a little bit, question mark, in a relative sense. Nothing outstanding by any means, but so the weapons that you mentioned, the resupply, ties in with the and regional impact is what's happened in Yemen, and how the conflict there, which largely was derived from the fallout of the Arab Spring. For those of you who don't know, there was basically one guy in charge for a couple decades in Yemen, and then the Arab Spring happened and he resigned, and then eventually there's just been like a struggle for power, and what eventually came into a sectarian conflict, which then became a proxy war between Iran, Saudi Arabia, with the Shia Houthis and fighting the Sunni kind of regime in charge. It's difficult because there's no one with like clear power that they will exercise that are Yemen specific. I mean, you have factions fighting with each other, and you have Saudi bombing, but then you have Iran playing the will we arm the insurgents role. And so the US is in this position of, okay, so we support this regime where we disagree with the governance structure, but they align with us in these other ways that are vital. And then it turns into a humanitarian disaster in Yemen with a UN report came out recently that cited that the second half of this year, there'll be about 19 million people that will need food assistance in Yemen. So that has been something that is obviously a tragedy, but definitely illustrates how America has to navigate these types of things with these strategic relationships.
Yeah, and it does go back to trying to build partnerships in different regions of the world and making the better of bad decisions, right? And I feel like sometimes you can feel responsible for one of the decisions that you've made. Of course, there's obviously like when the U.S. sends weapons to Saudi Arabia, and they in turn help out their factions in Yemen, there will be like collateral damage and stuff. But when you bring it out to like a bigger scale, you have to take that along with the judgment of having this relationship with Saudi Arabia helps us balance the power in the Middle East with Iran. These conflicts, limited conflicts, are much better than having these massive state conflicts. But it's very hard to see that when there's no massive state on state conflict going ahead, and it's just this proxy war with a lot of civilian disruption and casualties. And so
yeah, it totally speaks to like picking your battles. And I feel like the US, especially since some of the intervention examples that didn't go super well since the end of the Cold War, since the beginning of the Cold War, and they have been very careful about how much they engage with certain groups. And so basically, since Saudi Arabia and Iran aren't directly fighting with one another, Israel and Iran are by those three players in the area are not directly fighting each other to the point of you have one on one side and one on the other. I mean, you have like Iranian-backed insurgencies like bombing Israel, but that's like one thing. When it could be like they're considered as violent warfare.
But I want to kind of go off for a second, or go off on a bit of a tangent here with what could really like change that. And in my opinion, it would be a nuclear armed Iran. So the JCPOA obviously fell apart during the Trump administration, and there's been more efforts by the Biden administration to kind of reform these talks. It would pretty much delay Iran's nuclear program. Iran states that they want to use their nuclear program for like peaceful means, but once I'm not a great scientist at this, but I do know that once you get to a certain level of uranium enrichment, and I think it's like 20%, 30%, something like that. It's very difficult to get to that point, but it's much easier to move from that to about 80% uranium enrichment, which I believe is what you need to fit it onto a nuclear warhead.
Yeah.
Great. So, Eric, I'd like to get your thoughts on, how does fighting a war or how does supplying and helping to fight a war in Yemen help us divert a nuclear disaster here, or a nuclear armed conflict with a new nuclear power, Iran?
Yeah, it's one of those delicate flashpoints. There's so many flashpoints that we enjoy keeping an eye on, and hopefully they don't turn and catch on fire, which has been we've been pretty safe on that up until like a month ago. But helping achieve this balance of power falls into a type of theory that doesn't necessitate peace by means of getting rid of all conflict, but maintaining a conflict and degree of might that deters war. So the US getting so close with Saudi Arabia achieves the ends of not only American energy security, but it also helps Saudi domestic security from outside forces, that being Iran. So have being that backer, it's not just the US, it's a two-way relationship. Saudi Arabia knows this, that goes in every calculation. And do they think that the Chinese are going to be there for them? No, they know that the US has been there and aren't going anywhere anytime soon necessarily, even if the fouls are a little bit, tend to be a little flagrant for the time being. To borrow your basketball analogy from before, 'tis March. And so another interesting development over the course of the JCPOA negotiations that's different from when it started during the Obama administration is that the Israeli normalization with the Gulf states is completely different from what it was back then. And that is uniting a Western force relative to Iran, at least, because it's going back to kind of the classic enemy of my enemy. So
classic realism, baby. Throw
yeah,
values out the window. Let's talk about power, right?
yeah, and there's what I'm curious about is how domestic Islamist politics in some of these states will react to increasing relations with Israel specifically. There are some that must be taking it pretty well, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it, those being the elites at least. But curious how long that lasts, and it takes a few years, a couple significant events, and things can be completely on their head. But that potential positive relationship between Israel and the Gulf states is a real leverage over Iran, and could make them more incentivized to be like, well, who do we have in our corner? We can have more power in our corner if we don't have people in our corner. So, and more power would be in the form of nuclear weapons. So unless they get like Russia to be like, hey, you're gonna be with us, right? Or China for that means. But also, who are the reliable players? Are they going to be reliable partners if a regional conflict is existential for Iran? I don't know. But Saudi Arabia can't say the same thing, because I would be hard pressed to say America wouldn't be there for Saudi Arabia if push comes to shove and it was an existential crisis for at least the royal family to stay in charge. I don't know if that's the same for the Iranian regime. So this could be, I personally, the fan of nuclear deal. It at least prolongs the horizon of them having nuclear weapons, and if anything, I feel like the US and other partners should be able to get more concessions potentially out of Iran based on the evolving regional power dynamics that is Israel increasing normalization with the Gulf states.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the JCPOA, but I've kind of started to come down on the side that what's always the like quote, like humans are terrible at preparing for something, but we can adapt to it really well. Like people say that about climate change all the time, right?
Yeah.
So in theory, like buying more time with like with Iran, like in theory would help us prepare and maybe like make alliances that and like connections with countries in the Middle East that aren't necessarily visible right now or apparent, right? But then a part of me also thinks that there needs to kind of be this threat, this trigger of, oh shit, it's actually happening. Like this is going to happen, whether it's like right now or 5 years down the road, for countries to kind of get their ass in gear. So that whether the JCPOA had had gone through or not, and whether it's hard to play out like what would have happened if it were like so many what ifs in that scenario. But I do think that when you're just looking at a country, like in terms of just what capabilities do they have, that is the ultimate like decider for other countries to either like make alliances or deals or whatever. And maybe you'll see countries do the opposite, and instead of trying to balance power with Iran, they just bandwagon and they try and get their relationship with them very, very tight so that they don't have to worry about it, right? So there's a couple of different ways to look at it, but I think just in terms of buying time, 5 years or whatever, like what's that actually mean? What does 5 years actually mean? You can when you see these deals happen within a matter of months or like weeks even
Yeah.
throughout history. So
Yeah, I totally see what you mean. And I guess why I land where I land is that, I mean, they're basically already sanctioned to the point of being isolated like North Korea. So North Korea has nuclear weapons. They're being siloed with support from China. So like Iran's siloed with support from China. And they don't have nuclear weapons, at least not yet. Or maybe they do. Anyway, but I kind of think of it as engagement with Iran builds better relations with not only with them, and obviously we could disagree with the government, but the Iranian people as a whole are suffering from this. So I feel like a deal at least pushes the timeline out there, and maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't, but it could give a chance for the Iranian people to have more access to the outside world and better opportunities. So it's tough. Like, how much do you punish the regime in power, and as an outsider, and how much influence do you actually have, which is kind of the basis for this whole conversation. But
right, and you're seeing that you're bringing up the human rights aspect, which is almost inherent in U.S. foreign policy. Like we like to promote human rights, even if the U.S. itself isn't amazing on its human rights record. There's always this like idea of you wanting to progress yourself and also the world with human rights, but at the same time, and I'm going to bring this back to Russia real quick. Whose fault is it really that these are happening, right?
yeah,
Like economic sanctions, although they may hurt the Iranian population, it hurts them a lot less than if we would have taken actual tangible conflict on the country. And it's not like the Iranian leadership doesn't know about this, right?
mm-hmm.
So there's a part of me that says, yes, you're right, like it is hurting the Iranian people. At the same time, I wonder if you can completely blame that on just the folks, just the governments enforcing sanctions.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the Iranian regime is not exactly the most tolerant toward their domestic population, but that kind of gets to the delicate dance that countries have to do when maintaining relationships, if they're not a major power that can really assert themselves. One of them being India purchasing discounted Russian oil. So India, one of those countries that is growing a ton. They're a player, which gives them a little bit of leeway to do what they want to do. But at the same time, do you think that what can America do about them doing this dance?
I think they can get away with it. I really do. India's always just tried to play, and for the longest time has really played in the middle of a lot of this quote unquote great power competition between the U.S., Russia, and China. I think that India is looking at itself as a future great power in the next decade or two, really rising up. And I think they see this as a very I think they see this as an opportunity. And it's a little bit, it's a little bit of a risk to do this, but India needs natural resources. They're kind of natural resource strapped in a similar way to China, where they really need it, and it will help spur more economic growth for them. So I think it's a pretty solid play by India. I think that it's the U.S. won't be happy about it, but I India is a little bit too big of a geostrategic partner for us to ruin a relationship about that. I would liken it to the AUKUS agreement with the nuclear submarines, where the French were really really mad that the Americans made this deal with Australia to supply them with nuclear submarines, but they got over it. And a part of me thinks that the U.S. is really not going to be happy about this, but at the end of the day, they'll get over it because there's bigger fish to fry in the South China Sea, especially with the Biden administration initially wanting to pivot over to China and making China their primary foreign policy focus.
Yep.
I don't think they're going to be happy about it, but I don't think that they're going to want to risk, a key partner in balancing China in Asia. So,
yeah, I would say that India may be second to Japan in strategic value when balancing with China. And so, and we can't isolate really anyone. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Think they'll get away with it. And it's just like, ooh, I'm sorry. And it's just an eye roll, and we're on to the next one. Bigger fish to fry. Exactly.
It's like the youngest kid acting up in the very back seat, and the mother's just going to keep on driving. She'll yell, but she can't quite reach him in the back seat of the minivan. So she'll get pissed, and he might get a talking to at the end of the road trip. But right now she needs to focus on the interstate and make sure the van gets there safely. So,
yep.
So we were talking about U.S. power a little bit, and there's obviously limits to it. A lot of the U.S. interests in a lot of these different countries, they overlap, they intermingle, and if you're looking at it, the U.S. has a lot less control than I feel like some people really think. And I just wanted to point out that the U.S. does some things to try and gain and keep happy their allies, and they'll make concessions at some points and different things like that, and it doesn't always align with their overall interests. But I think that the crisis in Ukraine really showed what can happen when U.S. allies when that alliance structure is intact for the big stuff, right? When push really comes to shove and you need to show unity and stuff, that's why you aren't necessarily making these gains on humanitarian rights, for instance, with Saudi Arabia. Sometimes you just got to give it up. It sucks. It's not in alignment with our values. But I think one of the main roles of a diplomat is to kind of play that as well as you can, and scold without deteriorating a relationship, so that when you actually need your allies, you have that structure there. And because the U.S. doing everything by itself is very difficult. The U.S. doing it with multiple partners, not only is it more easy to act, but it's more easy to deter.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting to review the history of this comes with the entire history of human civilization, that is one community exercising power over another, but specifically the US after World War II. There is this fascinating snapshot and so much information about how we went about trying to understand what our role in the world is, as we emerge out of World War II as the preeminent power, and how, okay, it was like, all right, we have like basically a blank canvas of what we would like to do in the world, ish, to a degree. What can we try to do? And I think that people thought they were looking at a blank canvas then, but what they were actually looking at was something much more complicated than that. Hence why their things didn't go to plan in certain ventures abroad. And we've learned a lot since then, and how we interact with other places, and how when we had strong intervention policies, that didn't necessarily go very well. Sometimes, like, it actually went pretty well to achieve some means. Other times it didn't go well at all. And so we have this whole set of experiences now. We're like, okay, how do we engage now? And we're we have transformed into a world where there are several powers at play, and it's a really interesting time to be an observer, as we who have no power and influence talk about those who have power and influence. It's a really fascinating time to observe what's going on, and what theories have kind of tracked and other things that haven't quite kept on. So
yeah,
we'll
and I do think you made me think of this as well, is that just how many I guess contrasting ideas that history teaches us, right? You can't just take one example and throw it in here. You mentioned like interventions. You could also add to that list of mixed success, attempted coups, or just regime change in general. Appeasement is one that always gets brought up. People always think it's a bad idea because of World War II and appeasing Hitler. It worked in the Crimean War with Russia. So details matter. At the end of the day, details matter. In history, events don't repeat themselves to the detail.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the context of the place really matters, and it seems like we've learned that while philosophy can be a driving force, there is no single philosophy that is the driving force. And so, because we operated on that assumption for a lot of the Cold War, and it got a little messy. And so I think that's something that maybe people have known for a long time, but something that's really been driven home in the American diplomatic community is how to engage when things are gray, and how do we sell that as well? Because back in the day, you kind of sell things with in a policy or action based on one word. It could be like, oh, communism. That's how we're selling this policy. Now it's a lot more opaque than that. So how do we do that now? And so it's just kind of interesting.
Also, just one quick thing before we and then we'll go into our day in history. I meant the Crimean War back in the 1800s, not the
That's a good clarification.
I wasn't trying to say appeasement in 2014. That came out wrong, but I'm sure our listeners are up to snuff on that.
There are very few podcasts that correct themselves in very real time. So
yeah,
that's what makes us unparalleled.
So this week in history, March 21st, 1943, the second military conspiracy planned to assassinate Hitler actually failed. So Hitler was going back from the Soviet Union to Berlin, and he one of the guards on the plane was handled a package that was disguised as a bottle of liquor, and it was a bomb. But it all worked well except the bomb didn't defuse. It didn't explode. So that's tough. Usually you want those things to go off.
Right. Dang.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Close one.
Close one. Close
But no
one.
cigar.
Yeah. Yeah. Putin doesn't drink, so he can't, that one's out the window.
Does he not? Wow.
I heard that. I could be, people are saying, Quick Google says no. Funny thing, I was, for our listeners that really enjoy this, I was driving down the highway and it was at night. There was a restaurant sign, and usually maybe 1 or 2 letters are off. But Ruby Tuesday, all the letters were out except for DNA. So is Ruby Tuesday pro-Russia? Maybe. It's my contribution to This Week in History. It's very valuable.
All right, let's close out. You got a sponsor for us?
I do. Does daylight savings have you down? But you know what that provides? More light after work, and it's warmer out. So you know what you have to do? You have to cool down somehow. And how do you do that? Hamm's beer. Clear as day. Easiest decision to ever make. You want to get in the mood of hanging with your friends? Best compliment to having a little some brats on the grill, what have you, whatever your preferred grilled item is. Hamm's beer is beautifully certified. So
Hey Eric, ask me what I had for St. Patty's Day.
James, what did you have for St. Patty's Day?
Green eggs and hams.
There we go. Beautiful. See, we do it. We do it here. We walk the walk and talk the talk. That's true. So thank you for tuning in for this week of Animal Punditry. Really enjoyed having you here. Enjoyed the conversation. We may or may not talk about Ukraine in a week or two. We'll see how we're feeling. It was kind of fun to deviate from what's been capturing all the headlines, taking a step back, taking a look at the bigger picture. And so I appreciate you sticking with us.
Deal.